Attendees, we encourage you to engage with the other attendees in the group chat dialog box. On the toolbar below you, you'll find the survey button. This is a completely optional survey that does not affect receiving your CPE, but will help us gain valuable feedback from our audience. If you are experiencing any audio or technical issues, try refreshing your browser. This practice usually solves most issues experienced. Now, for the CPE credit and certificate process, whether you are viewing the event live or on demand, you will be required to view 50 minutes of this event to be awarded the CPE credit. Please see the CPE credit and certificate window to view the countdown timer. Once you have completed 50 minutes of viewing, the CPE certificate for the event will be uploaded to the ISACA CPE record section of your ISACA account. Please note that this process can take up to 48 hours for the CPE certificate and credit to be applied to your account. Now at this time, I'd like to welcome ISACA's VP of Member Experience, Liz Pisney.
Thanks, Diana. Hello, everyone, and welcome again to ISACA's Member Exclusive Speaker Series. Thank you so much for being with us here today. I'm Liz Pisney, Vice President of Member Experience here at ISACA Global. So please use the chat to say hello if you haven't already. I know we have attendees from all over the world joining us today. Again, no matter where you are, thank you for being here. ISACA brings you the Member Exclusive Speaker Series to help you explore the new approaches to developing as a leader and building skills to advance in your career. Through our dynamic speakers and thought leaders, ISACA members can learn new skills to use when managing teams, an organization, or themselves, like today's topic, focusing on emotional fluency. We hope you can join us for each of our Member Exclusive Speaker Series events, which are also free-to-member opportunities to earn CPE. Before I introduce today's speakers, I wanted to share a couple of ways for you to get involved with ISACA as a leader and with some upcoming events to support you in your career journey. First, ISACA will be hosting a virtual career fair to help all of our members advance their careers. So join us for this global recruiting event on Wednesday, the 25th of October from 3 a.m. Central Daylight Time to 3 p.m. Central Daylight Time. That's GMT -5 for those of you not in this time zone. Job seeker registration is now open. You just need to go to jobs.isaca.org. And when attending the event, you'll have the opportunity to engage directly with recruiters during the event through chat or through video. You'll be able to discover new career opportunities from employers eager to hire people with your experience, build your network by connecting with others in digital trust domains, and learn about hiring trends and ways to advance your career by attending live discussions taking place throughout the career fair that day. Also, if your company is hiring, then visit jobs.isaca.org to participate as an employer. We hope to see you all there. Next is one I know near and dear to the heart of many ISACA members. We are celebrating Community Day on the 7th of October this year. For those of you that don't know, Community Day is a wonderful opportunity to make an impact and be a leader in your community. When ISACA members, staff, families, and friends spend a few hours on one dedicated day a year giving back to their local communities, we can truly change the world. Visit engage.isaca.org/events/Community Day to learn more and connect with your local chapter or to participate or host in volunteer opportunities. And be sure to post your contributions to social media the day of using hashtag ISACA Community Day and follow that hashtag all around the world on October 7th to see all the amazing impact and projects that are going on. Speaking of membership, do you know someone who would elevate their career with an ISACA membership? Be a leader amongst your peers and refer them to ISACA. ISACA's Member Get a Member program is now through December 31st. Our referral program enables ISACA members like you to help grow our community with like-minded professionals. Top recruiters can earn cash rewards up to $500 US, or a free one-year membership, or even a free lifetime professional membership. Learn more at isaca.org and search for Member Get a Member. And last but not least, before we jump in today, a reminder that membership and certification renewals will open in just another week or so. So keep an eye on your mailboxes and remember to renew so that you can continue to enjoy benefits like these and so much more. Now, I'm thankful that you're all here with us today, and this topic reflects our shared goal of continually developing new skills, establishing ourselves as leaders, and finding our next breakthroughs. Today's speakers, Liz Fosseline and Molly West Duffy, are best-selling authors of No Hard Feelings, The Secret Power of Embracing Emotion at Work. I think I have my copy here. And Big Feelings, How to Be Okay When Things Are Not Okay. They are experts on how and when to express emotions at work. Please help me in giving a nice warm welcome to Liz and Molly.
Thank you so much, Liz. And so nice to be here with all of you today. I'm seeing in the chat that people are here from all over the world, which is so fun for us. So a little bit of introduction. I'm Molly. I'm the co-author of two books, No Hard Feelings and Big Feelings, as mentioned. And I'm an expert in organizational design and learning development. And I'll hand it over to Liz.
Hi, everyone. Also super excited to be here. I'm Liz, expert in emotions at work, and the co-author with Molly, and then also the illustrator. So all of the illustrations throughout this I created and hope you enjoy. Thank you for having us.
So our first book was all about emotions at work and when you should listen to them, when you should not listen to them. It came out in 2019. And our second book came out in 2021, and it's all about difficult emotions in life and work. So we're going to be covering things from both books today. But the thesis of all of the work that we do is that we are humans. We have emotions. Between 9 to 5, even when we go to work, we still have emotions. And so how can we communicate them? How can we learn from them rather than just repressing them? So I want to start off by having you all share in the chat, in one word, how are you feeling today? It does not need to be a professional emotion, quote unquote. So you could be feeling tired. You can also be combining emotions. So we've heard excited, tired, which is a combination of excited and tired. And you're all doing a great job of sharing where you're from if you want to keep doing that, and also share in one word how you are feeling today, seeing them come in. Got some tired, also groovy. I like groovy. Sleepy, sick. I'm sorry to hear that. Annoyed. Yep. Thanks for being honest. So this is really helpful. We do this also from the perspective of engaging you all. There's really good research that shows if you participate in the first 5 minutes of a meeting, you're going to be more likely to participate later. So that's also why we ask you to do this, which is a good tip for your teams. So keep them coming. Today, we're going to be talking about emotional fluency and what it is, how to become an emotionally fluent leader, leading multicultural teams, and then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. If you have questions that come up throughout, please feel free to put them in now, and we'll make sure to get to them in the Q&A section. And so I'm going to move on to emotional fluency. So I love these emotions still coming in. Great to see. You may be familiar with a couple of different types of emotional skills. So a lot of folks are familiar with emotional intelligence. What that means is being able to identify what you are feeling and identify what other people are feeling. We think that's great, but it's not quite enough. The second thing is emotional granularity, which is identifying exactly what you are feeling in the moment and being more specific. So rather than just saying like, I'm feeling stressed, maybe going a level deeper and saying, I'm feeling anxiety about the upcoming deadline. And then emotional agility is being flexible with your thoughts. So when you are in moments of frustration, that's totally fine. We want you to feel that frustration, but we don't want you to be hooked by that emotion and not be able to move through it. And then the last one, which we're going to talk a lot about today, is emotional fluency, which is being able to understand, but also translate and apply the power of emotions in a healthy and productive manner. So there's actually a lot that we can learn from our emotions. And if we do a good job of communicating them, they also can be really helpful to others. So we're going to talk more about that. So diving into emotional fluency. It starts with understanding what your emotions are, pinpointing them, and understanding, would this be helpful to share right now? Making space to talk about emotions. It can be really awkward to do this, so it's really nice to create space. It's dedicated time. And then practicing talking about emotions in a non-emotional way. So if you are at the height of your anger or frustration, that may not be the best time to talk about your emotions. We want you to get until you're not feeling as emotional and then go back and say, this is how I was feeling. So why does all this matter? How does this show up in the workplace, in the bottom line? Google did a really great study a few years ago called Project Aristotle, and they looked at what, out of all the teams at Google, who were the most effective teams and what made them effective. And they looked at executive evaluation of the team. So how, senior leaders, how did they evaluate the team? Team leaders, how did they evaluate the team? Team member evaluation, so teams themselves, how are we doing? And then they looked at sales performance against a quarterly quota. So really a lot of great data here. And what they found was that who was on the team mattered less than how the team worked together. So we think it's all about getting the right team members, but actually it's about supporting those team members and how they are working together. So the best teams, here's what they did. Mistakes were seen as learning opportunities. There was that safety to learn from mistakes. It was okay to ask for help or point out a problem. Each person felt supported by the team, and that's where we're getting to the emotional aspect, and unique skills and talents were valued and utilized. So all of these things you look at and you say, okay, we could do that on my team. Like all of these things are very doable, but they do take intentional work. And so we're going to talk about a couple of ways that you can get there today. And one other thing that we like to share is this quote, the wrong norms could hobble a team, even if individually all of the team members were exceptionally bright. So what this means is that even if you have a team of all-stars, if you have not taken the time to create a good emotional culture and set norms as a team, doesn't matter. You can have a team of all-stars and they still cannot be working together. So what does this mean for you as a leader? When you are thinking about expressing your own emotions as a leader, some emotional expression builds trust. So great graph by Liz here. If we think about, we've all been around a leader where they don't share any emotion and we don't trust that person because we're like, are you even a human? Are you a calculating robot? What is going on here? Do you have emotions? And then on the other hand, we have been around leaders where every emotion that comes through their brain, they express. And it's like, I'm feeling this right now, I'm feeling this right now, I'm feeling, and that's also exhausting. And so you want to be somewhere in the middle to get that trust of your team. People respond positively to empathy. So as a leader, we want to see that you understand what we are going through. It's a really tough time in the company. We want you to acknowledge that you can see that we are struggling. Your mood has an outsized impact on others. So when we become leaders, people start paying attention to what we're feeling a lot more than they paid attention to what we were feeling when we were an individual contributor. So people may be reading your facial expressions or all the things that, reading them between the lines of all the things you're saying and not saying. And this means that you as a leader, you have to pay more attention to how you are expressing your emotions than you did when you were an individual contributor. And even if you think you're doing a good job with this, it's still like people can still read into all the emotions that you are feeling and not expressing. So there's a really good study that shows when we're sitting next to somebody and they have high blood pressure, we can pick up on that. Even though they're not saying anything, like that's how attuned we are to others. And so people, especially as leaders, can pick up on all the things they're feeling, even if you're not saying them. Cool. I'm seeing a lot of thumbs up for that. That's like, yeah, it's interesting to think about. So what do we do with all this? One of the tools that we recommend is something called selective vulnerability. And this is a phrase we came up with. We love vulnerability. I don't know if any of you have read books by Brene Brown. We love her. And vulnerability is great. But as a leader in the workplace, you cannot be 100% vulnerable. Like, it just is, you cannot share every thought that comes through your mind about your anxieties, because that's not the position that you are in. So our definition of this is opening up while still prioritizing the stability and the psychological safety for your team. So going back to all the team studies that Google did, we want to preserve that psychological safety that they found was so important. So what this means is walking the line between sharing, which builds trust, and oversharing, which destroys it. So how do we do this? First thing that you can do is provide a path forward. So let's take a look at this. Let's say you start with a moment of openness and you're saying, okay, I'm going to share how I'm feeling. As a leader, you have to pair that with, and here's what we're going to do about that moving forward. And those two combined are what we call selective vulnerability. So an individual contributor may be able to just say, I'm feeling really anxious about this. Done. But you as a leader, you have to say, I am also feeling anxious about this. I want to acknowledge that and be open about that. And here's what we're going to do about it. So we've created a little example here. Because of the situation, I'm feeling blank. Here's what I'm planning to do to address the situation. And here's what I need from you. So let me give you an example. Let's say that your team has just gone through layoffs, which many organizations have done this year. You might say something like, because of the situation, I'm feeling really sad. I really loved working with a lot of the colleagues who no longer work with us, and I feel a lot of sadness. And I also feel some anxiety about what's coming up. Here's what I'm planning to do to address the situation. I'm going to make sure that our team is functioning as well as we can, and that we still have the resources that we need, even though we've just lost a couple team members. And here's what I need from you. I need you to tell me if your workload gets too high in the next month, so that I can help you prioritize, so that I can help our team say no to things because we are operating at a reduced capacity. So that's what it looks like in action. Sharing the emotions, and you are sharing what you're going to do about it and what you need from others. We'd love to hear in the chat, what are some examples of selective vulnerability done well? So things that you've heard leaders say in your organizations or in past organizations. What are some things or actions that they've taken that really model this? And we ask this because usually people can think of someone who is a good selective vulnerability model for them. And they go, oh yeah, that person who I worked for or who I work with, they do a really good job of this. And then I would say back to you, cool, what can you learn from that person? So how can you think about their behavior and start to bring that into some of the ways that you're showing up as a leader? So responses coming in from Andrew, I misjudged how that would play out, and I'm sorry. Yes. A manager showing genuine concern and listens intensely. I've seen leaders attempt it, but it comes off as fake. Yep. They're not being authentic with their emotions. Thank you for sharing that, Viola. Boss informing us, oops, the chat is moving, about a critical deadline of go live project and the expectations from us. Leadership acknowledges the workload and the difficulty of what they're asking. Yes, it's so important, rather than just saying, great, everything's great. It's like, no, we're in a difficult time. We're asking you to do a lot. Being empathetic. I don't know the solution. Are there any problems? Yes, it's such a great example of being vulnerable. I don't know. Beginning a project, the leader said, none of us know what we are doing. We will learn together going forward, admitting a mistake. It's acceptable to not be perfect. Managers validating your emotions. Yes, such great examples. Thank you all from sharing here. I know this is worrying, but if anyone wants to speak to me, they can. Great. I mean, I could, this is a whole manager curriculum here with everything that you all are sharing. So I encourage you all to read through the chat because there's a lot of really good suggestions coming through here. Okay, I got to move us on for time, but thank you all for sharing, and I'm going to hand it over to Liz.
Thank you. And yeah, thank you so much for all the comments, and really encourage people to read through those because there's some really great examples in there, and I think you all have a lot to learn from each other as well. Okay, so other ways that you can practice selective vulnerability. And the second, not the first, the second is to flag feelings without becoming emotionally leaky. So one of the people that Molly and I interviewed for our books is Kim Scott. She's written a book called Radical Candor about giving feedback that we highly recommend. And for a lot of those years, she thought that she was a calm, cool, collected leader that was really good at managing her emotions. One of her reports came up to her and said, I just want you to know that our team knows exactly what kind of day we're going to have by your mood when you walk in the door. And she was like, oh my goodness, I'm not as cool and calm and collected as I thought I was. And so what she started to do was flag her feelings, but she didn't go into more detail than felt comfortable. So for example, if she had a really hard morning, she hadn't slept, there was a lot of traffic, she had, maybe someone, like an argument with someone at home, she would come in the morning and she would say, I've had a morning, it has nothing to do with you, I'm just going to take a couple minutes and drink my cup of coffee. If she had back-to-back meetings all day, at the end of the day, she would come into her one-on-ones and say, it's been a whirlwind of a day, I really want to be here and be present, I'm going to try, just flagging that. So again, if I come off as distracted or frazzled, it has nothing to do with you. And again, the goal here is not to sort of pour everything that you're feeling out on the other person, but just to flag for them, there is something going on. You are picking up on that, but you don't need to worry. Like the anxiety, I don't want to create more anxiety for you. And so especially when times are uncertain, it's so important for leaders to try to reduce unnecessary anxiety. There will probably be anxiety that is justified, but you don't want to add to that if you don't have to. Putting yourself in the other person's shoes. So really thinking through, okay, if I heard this, if someone shared this with me, especially my leader, would this feel like useful? Is this good information to know? Or is this something that would kind of unnerve me or feel like too much information or just burden me? As if you ever have any hesitancy, we always recommend sleeping on it. So words are like toothpaste. Once they're out of the tube, you can't put them back in. So always, again, better to kind of think on it. You can go back and share, but once you've shared, you can't really take back. Things that might be useful for the team to know. So my manager, started to move meetings around. And then at one point, he finally shared that his father was in hospice and he was taking care of him. And so it was really useful for us to know that because suddenly it explained why he was kind of, moving things around, why he wasn't answering as quickly as he normally had to emails and messages. And so again, that actually helped us show up for him and reduced our anxiety because we weren't reading into those pauses or reading into the times when he was not responsive. Reading the room. So when you enter a meeting, whether it's virtual or in person, if you notice that everyone's anxious, if you notice that no one's participating, everyone seems like they're sort of like reading email or checking their phone or just, really upset, pausing and being willing to drop your agenda. I've had this happen in my team. So this was, again, I worked at a startup and there was a lot of uncertainty and I came to a team meeting and it was just clear that everyone was really nervous. And so instead of diving into the tasks that week, I just said like, hey, let's take a moment. What are your concerns? Again, I flagged like, I don't have all the answers. I won't be able to address everything. I will try to look into it and get back to you. But I think it's useful to acknowledge what we're all feeling. And again, this doesn't need to be the whole meeting, but just a moment of let's quickly huddle as a team. How can we support each other? As Molly mentioned, do we need to reprioritize? Do we have too much work? Like just what's going on, I think can be really useful. help put people at ease. Concerns. So in the example where you are about to share some challenging news or you need to speak to something that you know is really hard, actually taking some time before and thinking through what questions might you get, what might people say, what information might they want. I think going to HR and asking for advice, like if this comes up, how do I address it? Where should I point people for resources can be really valuable. But doing a lot of that prep work helps you feel more confident in the moment. And I think even preparing, if I get this question, here's how I'm going to respond, helps you again come across as you know what you're doing, you can lead the team through this, but you're still authentically you. I think when you don't take this step, it's often easier to kind of freeze up or maybe share more than you want to. So really having a clear idea of like, this is what I'm going to say. And if this question comes up, here's how I'll respond. And then finally, figuring yourself out. So a huge part of selective vulnerability and leadership and being an emotionally fluent leader is to understand your tendencies, understand, your sort of anxiety triggers. And one piece of this is to pinpoint your emotional expression tendency. And so we all have a base tendency here. This is, built on a variety of factors. So things like how you were raised, how you were socialized, culture you come from. We will talk about that a bit more later in the session. What you learned was safe to express, those kinds of things. And this is not fixed, so you can kind of slide along this spectrum. It is a spectrum, but generally we tend to have if you're an under and over emoter. And so under emoters don't display as much emotion. They're not as expressive. Over emoters, on the other hand, they have no poker face. You feel it. Everyone knows it. You're just you get very excited about things. And then even emoters are somewhere in the middle and they operate. And even if you're an even emoter, again, depending on the situation, you might skew more under emoter. Let's say you don't know people around you that well, or you might skew more over emoter if you're really comfortable in a certain situation. So given those descriptions, we would love to hear what all of you are. So if you want to maybe post in the chat if you think you're an under emoter, an over emoter, or an even emoter. And we'll see the responses that come in. And the reason that we share this also is sometimes when we go through these, especially in live sessions or in-person sessions, people will say, I'm bought in, I want to be an empathetic leader, but I'm just not that expressive naturally. And so do I need a personality transplant if that's what if that's what's required? And you absolutely do not. It's really useful to be authentic to yourself. But as we'll discuss in a few seconds, there are some slight tweaks you might want to make and things to pay attention to. Okay, so we have under, always strive to be even, controlled over motor, even, but it depends on the circumstances, even to over, even to under, over, under. I think of myself as an under emoter, but others would probably think I'm even. Okay, so it seems like we have a lot of even, maybe leaning one way or the other, and then under. Okay, yeah, and a lot of people are flagging that this depends on the environment, which is absolutely true. The other thing I'll say is it's very fun when we're in person. We'll often ask people, raise your hand if you think you're an under emoter, and people will sort of, these are the under emoters, like, yes, I'm an under emoter, and then we say, raise your hand if you're an over emoter, and the hands shoot up, and they're like, yes, that's me. And so even in the way people respond to this question in person, it clearly signals which one they are. Thank you so much for sharing. Keep it coming. Always interesting to see kind of how a group splits out. And we'll also say there's no good or bad, right? Like under emoter, over emoter, even, one is not better than the other. It's just kind of understanding your tendency. And then even emoters in the middle. Okay, so asked you this question. And again, please keep the responses coming. Always fun to see again. Also, the context is really useful. I saw one person said under at work, over at home. Really good to know that as well. Okay, so actually we have a poll here. So if you want to take the response that you put in the chat and quickly fill in the poll and let me know which of these you are. So I tend to skew, I think, a bit under a motor. So I'm going to fill that in. And we'll give you a second or two to respond. I see the responses starting to come in. And if you said you're even leaning one way or the other, just you can mark yourself as even. And if you are different depending on the context, so I think I actually am also under at work and over at home, please enter your work one, because that's kind of the context we're discussing today. But I love that people have brought up that nuance. Okay, so a lot of responses coming in. I'm guessing from seeing the chat was a lot of evens, next most popular is under, and then over. So we'll see in the poll if I'm correct. Okay, I'm gonna move on. In the interest, okay, so yeah, so mostly even, and then we have under and then over. Okay, so my chat reading was pretty good here. Really interesting to see this. So it also, we do see that people tend to self-select into different environments. So we've done this, for example, at law firms and with data analyst teams, and those teams tend to have more underemoters. It's not always true, but that tends to be the pattern. And then we've also done this like with ad agencies and sales teams, and those people tend to be overemoters. So there is some correlation with being an introvert or an extrovert, but you can be an extrovert and still be an underemoter. You just love being around people. So always interesting to see how this maps out. But here we see a lot of eveners. All right, thanks everyone for taking the poll. Okay, so underemoters, again, not good or bad, but just some things to think about. So again, you might feel things less strongly, you might not, but you generally don't express those feelings as much. I grew up, my parents immigrated to the US, they're very stoic. So I definitely made me lean more towards being an underemoter, because that's what I learned at a young age was like the way to operate. It may, though, be harder for others to trust you. So I think especially if someone is an overemoter and they're working with you and you're an underemoter, it's a little harder for them to like read you, to feel like there's a real connection there, especially when times are hard. I think you might have a tendency to come across more as reserved and distant versus like that empathetic, I understand what's going on. People might also mistake your lack of calmness for enthusiasm. So especially if you're just meeting someone, it might not be your nature to be like, hey, it's so great to meet you. That definitely is not my nature. But if that's someone else's norm, they might mistake that for you just not being excited to meet them. But one of the great things is people, and you might already notice this in your life, people really come to you during challenging situations, because they know that you are not going to get like visibly frustrated. You're kind of going to be able to really map out a plan and sort of keep a calm demeanor throughout whatever happens. So again, just things to consider. Overemoters. So those of you who said over, and again, if you're even, you might lean one way or the other, so still useful to understand. Overemoters, you feel things really strongly. You express your feelings visibly and verbally. I have many friends like this. It's just, it's always a party to be around them because they're so expressive. And like I said, people are attracted to that enthusiasm and energy. When things are going well, it's so fun to be around an overemoter because they're really going to hype you up. They're going to get so excited for your wins, those kinds of things. It's more likely that when an overemoter has a bad day, that bad day starts to stick its tentacles into like every single interaction and meeting, right? So if you're frustrated, if you're angry, if you're upset, you're more likely to project that, even if the person that you're speaking with really did not contribute whatsoever to that mood. So useful, again, to keep that in mind. So opportunities. So small tweaks to consider, especially if you're in a leadership position. If you're an underemoter, basically it comes down to finding small ways that still feel authentic to express a little more emotion. So one way to do this is to practice emotional granularity. So Molly went through this at the beginning of the session. This is really getting specific about the emotion that you're feeling. And so if you can learn to tap in more that you're not just feeling bad, you're feeling frustrated or anxious or tired, That will help you, if you want to, articulate more what you're feeling, or just like kind of get more in tune with your emotions. I think under-emoters do tend to often suppress emotion. And so it's useful, again, you don't have to act on it. You don't even have to express it, but just to start to get more in touch with what's going on within you. Praise and gratitude are really safe emotions to lean into in the workplace. So if your team does a really good job, your tendency might be to say, that was good. But instead saying like, thank you so much for all the effort you put into this. I'm really impressed by the work that we did together. And that might feel unnatural at first. It might take some practice. But again, people usually are very receptive to praise and gratitude. What we often sometimes advise leaders who really struggle with this is actually to put a block on your calendar. So this could be like every Thursday, just 5 minutes. Remember to thank someone. Remember to praise someone. If this feels really unnatural to you, you can also make it a team practice. So at one of my previous organizations where I worked, my manager actually created a Slack channel called Cheers for Peers, where anyone on the team could share something that someone on the team or outside of the team did for them or did that was really impressive, and they wanted to kind of give them some praise and gratitude. So leaning into that, whether it's you expressing it or creating ways for your team to express it to each other. And then never underestimating the power of a question. So again, I am not great at small talk at happy hours. And so I've come up with really good questions. And so coming up with something like you would actually be interested to learn. So it might not be, what do you think about the weather? It might be, like, what was your favorite breakfast food growing up? Or what do you enjoy most about your profession? Things like that, where you can kind of steer the conversation into something that you're genuinely curious about. And then I think once the other person opens up, it might be a little easier for you to reciprocate as well. And then finally, conducting an emotional proofread. So if there's one thing you take away from this, I hope there's many things, but this is always something I think is really important. And so under-emoters have a tendency also to under-emote when they send messages. And so this is a real email. It's like slightly edited, but this is a real situation that I faced kind of earlier in my career. And this is from my boss, who was a hardcore under-emoter. And I received this on a Thursday night. And so seeing this, I was like, it's very casual. I don't really get what they want from me. They just want to see me at some point tomorrow to discuss something nebulous. And so I was just convinced that I was getting fired, right? Like I went on this whole spiral of, I need a plan. I need to figure out what other jobs to apply to. And then I came into the office the next morning and my boss was like, hey, the memo you drafted was great. I just had a couple comments that I wanted to edit and discuss with you. And so again, this is what happens if you're an under-emoter and you're not noticing that and adjusting for it slightly, is you might cause unnecessary anxiety. And so an emotional proofread means instead of just shooting off that message that says, let's talk, you take a moment to step back and say, how would I feel if I received this? Have I included all the information that I need to in here? And then instead going back and quickly editing it to write, I have a few suggestions about what you turned in, but overall it looks good. Let's chat tomorrow, right? The second message, I'm not going to stay up all night. I'm not going to be nervous. The first message, I'm going to be really, really stressed until I see you and understand what's going on. The same thing applies for like if you put a surprise one-on-one on someone's calendar, right? Like provide context. Again, if it's not about anything stressful, like just say, hey, just quickly thought we needed more time to regroup on the project. Scheduling time for us to do that. It just takes, a couple seconds, maybe a minute, but it really helps the other person not have a bad day. Okay, so over-emoter opportunities. The first is to practice responding rather than reacting. And so a reaction is when you feel it and you lean into that feeling and that dictates your behaviors and your expression. A response is when you actually pause for a moment and think with intention, like, what do I want to do? What do I want to create in this moment? It's hard to do this sometimes, right? Like if you're in a meeting with other people, you can't often, especially if you're the manager or the leader, you can't be like, excuse me, I just need to go walk around the block for 30 minutes. I'll get back to you. And so what I've seen a friend do that I thought was really lovely at dinner. She said, having a reaction to your words, and I need a moment. So even just saying like, that's an interesting question. Let me think about it for a moment. Just creating that space for yourself, again, to really figure out like, how do I want to show up, rather than just leaning into whatever your reaction is. Big part of that is pausing before engaging. Oops, going too fast here. And then I said this earlier, but really going to bed angry. So trying to figure out, when you're in the heat of an emotional reaction, that is usually not the best time to articulate it, to get into it. That's usually when you might make a situation worse or say things that you wish you didn't say. And so again, go to bed angry. Sometimes you're angry because you're just very tired and you need a good night's sleep. But really putting distance between that reaction and, as much as you can, your response, how you want to show up. And then reminding yourself that tendencies differ. So if you do, I think this is so useful to do with your team to kind of have this discussion. Molly and I also have an assessment on our website that you can take or share with your team. And so really having this shared language, I think it's so useful to know, I'm an overemoter, this person is an underemoter. If they seem like they're not as excited, it doesn't mean they're not as excited. It just means they're expressing that differently than I might. So again, that awareness is really crucial. Okay. So key takeaways so far for being an emotionally fluent leader. Again, some emotional expression is really important. It really builds trust. Your mood creates a blueprint for your people. You have more information about the organization. People are going to be looking to you harder and longer to understand what's going on. Pairing a moment of vulnerability with a path forward. And then thinking through, like, what is my emotional expression tendency and how might I want to change my behavior slightly just to sort of show up more for my team. Okay, the next part, the third part that we wanted to discuss today is leading multicultural teams. So a lot of large organizations are global. Even if you work within a small team, you might be working with people in different time zones, or you just might be working with people who grew up in a different place. And these do have big impacts on how we show up, again, like what emotions we feel are safe to express. So as an example, again, my parents are from Northern Europe. They're very stoic. And I remember my first day of college, I met someone whose family was from Spain. And just like the way we interacted was hilariously different. You know, he went in for like the double kiss, and I was just like, I need you to stand 6 feet away from me. Otherwise, you're invading my personal space. So small anecdote, but these cultural differences are real. So a couple things to keep in mind if you are working with people from very different cultures. Doesn't sound like rocket science, but again, keeping in mind that different people are different. So this applies not only to cultural differences, but to emotional expression tendencies. One of the books on this topic that Molly and I love is this book called The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. And she is a professor. She's from the US, but she now teaches at INSEAD in France. And she lives in France, is raising her children there, and got really interested in these cultural differences and how they show up in the workplace. And so what she did is she actually mapped out, you can see on this matrix, it's like how confrontational a culture is, how much they want to avoid confrontation, and then how emotionally expressive they are. If you want to know more about this, again, highly recommend her book. And this is, I will also say, these are generalizations, right? Like just because you are from Italy doesn't mean that this is exactly descriptive of you, but these do tend to be trends to watch out for. And so why does this all matter? It's just really useful. Again, my mom, when she writes emails, they are extremely direct and extremely short. Like if I'm an American, so I was raised here, and now I've learned, in the US, I'll write like, how was your weekend? Hope you're doing well. Could you please send me the file? Thank you so much, Liz. And she will write back and be like, here's the file, Sylvia. So, right, if I'm not aware of like the fact that that's just a cultural difference, I will probably be like, whoa, this was a really intense, curt email. And she's actually learned over time and more as she's worked in the US to add in the like, how was your weekend? That kind of stuff. But again, just useful to keep that in mind so that you're not like reading into a message when it might just be a cultural difference.
And one thing I want to name here too is based on who we have in the chat and where you shared that you're from. I mean, this is such a global group, which is so fun for us. So please do share. Like, we want to hear your individual, if you looked at that slide that Liz just shared and you have thoughts around that, we'd love to hear it. Sorry, go ahead, Liz.
Agree. Yeah, I'm going to keep going for time because we do want to have time for questions, but agree with Molly. We'd love to hear stories. So please share those in the chat and be on the lookout for each other's responses. So yes, words are just a window to a world. So again, keeping in mind that the words that you see in an email are not fully representative of what someone's thinking, of their emotions. And so ideally, we're doing those emotional proofreads and we're getting better at that. But again, making sure that you're not jumping to conclusions. And so the story that I like to share here is about just like how we jump to conclusions and then turn something into a big situation when it might not always need to be one. Sometimes it is. But so I was working with someone many years ago, and I noticed he was new, he joined the team, and I noticed when I would ask him questions, he would respond by speaking incredibly slowly, and he would over-enunciate every word. And I found it so annoying. Like, it got to the point where I was asking him questions just to hear these long, drawn-out responses. And I really started to just hate that he was doing this. And then a couple of months later, we went to dinner with our team, and he and I sat next to each other and ended up having this really lovely conversation. And so I asked him at the end of the night, hey, do you notice sometimes when I ask you questions, you speak really slowly when you respond? And I said it just matter of fact with no malice, anything. And he responded and said, I know, I really want to sound smart in front of you, so I'm taking a while to choose the exact right words. Which was the total opposite of what I had thought, right? So I had the facts, which is that he spoke very slowly when he responded. I layered on some assumptions, which is he's condescending. He's doing this because he thinks I can't keep up with his response. And then I layered on judgment, like, how dare he? I don't want to work with him. And basically, these assumptions and the judgment were completely incorrect. And so not every story is going to get wrapped up in a bow like this, but I do think it's a useful reminder to approach these situations with curiosity. Account for what researchers call a negativity bias. So when we see an email that is neutral in tone, we tend to think it's negative. So if Molly responds to an email and says, thanks, period, I will be like, ooh, is she upset with me? When in fact, she just means thanks. So accounting for that. And then really understanding your team learning to navigate some of these differences, learning to understand each other's emotional expression tendencies. I think that's a useful reminder as well. And then 2 more tips. The last one we have, or the second to last one here, is to co-create something called an It's Okay To list. So the idea here is that every team has norms that are often unspoken, and it can be really useful to kind of explicitly codify what you want as your team norms, especially if you're working across very different cultures or just have a lot of different people on your team. And so this comes from the UK Digital Services Office. There was a designer there, and he noticed this, that during onboarding, you were told all these things like be vulnerable, care about each other, and then people never really heard that said again. So he said to his organization, let's make an It's Okay To list. Send me everything you think it's okay for people on this team to do. Then he put that all on a list, had leadership approve it, and they printed out these big yellow posters and put these in every conference room. This was before the pandemic, so they were all in person. And it's just much more likely that you will think it's okay to do these things if there's a giant yellow poster telling you that it is. So ask why and why not. Introduce yourself. Ask what an acronym stands for. I love the ones that contradict each other. Have a messy desk. Have a tidy desk. This yellow one comes from the pandemic. So you can see there's some very pandemic specific ones or remote work ones. So it's okay to sit, stand, or lie down for meetings, have your pet in the background, talk about it, not talk about it. And again, this will be different for every single team. So some teams, again, they like to have their cameras on during meetings. Some say it's fine to have your cameras off. Some say let's have our cameras on the first 5 minutes for that human connection, and then we can turn them off. But it's just useful to figure out what do you want to agree to as a team so that everyone knows and there's no anxiety around it. Molly and I also worked with this coffee company, Death Wish Coffee. They created an It's Okay To list, and then they took every item and made these social cards that they put on LinkedIn and Instagram. And they found that it was actually a really good tool for recruiting, that candidates loved that they were sort of publicly committing to these norms. And so what we'd love to hear is, what would you put on your team's It's Okay To list? So as a leader, what is something, and this could be even for yourself, what is something that you wish you could remind yourself that it's perfectly okay to do? And what is something that you just would want your team, or you would want the other people in your organization to know that it is okay to do? Okay, so I'm going to pause for a couple of seconds. It's okay to not root for the Dallas Cowboys. Love that. Ask questions. Another ask questions. Disagree. Cry. Say no. Not know all the answers. Okay, a lot of saying no's, a lot of making mistakes. Ask why. Ask for help. Yeah, I think these are really great, especially I think if you have maybe new grads on your team or people who are newer to the workplace. I just know when I first entered the workforce, I didn't know, that it was okay to, ask your manager to help you prioritize, to have a question. I really thought that I just needed to know everything on day one. And so I think it's especially useful for, it can be especially useful for those audiences to hear this message. Okay, try a new approach. Say no, suggest alternative solutions. Let me know if expectations are not clear. I love that. Yeah. Prioritize how you feel. Talk about your hobbies. Make mistakes, but make a new mistake every time. I love that. Yeah, make a new mistake is really good. Let's see. Put your health first. Okay, another one about I haven't heard that before. I really love it's okay to make a mistake, but not the same mistake twice. I think that's cool. We should be learning. Great. Questions, identify problems. Okay, these are amazing. Again, we do want time for Q&A at the end. So I'm going to continue, but please keep them coming. It's so nice to see, again, these suggestions. Final suggestion here is to fill out something called a How to Work With Me guide. So Molly and I did not come up with this idea. They're often called user manuals, but we did create our own. Again, it's on our website if you do want to see it. But you can also just create a list of questions that feels good for your team. So things we have on ours: I do my best work when, I'm more of an introvert extrovert, the best way for me to communicate is, or the best way to communicate with me, and then how you prefer to receive and give feedback. And the goal here is not to sort of put a line in the sand and say, the best way to communicate with me is over email. I refuse to attend a meeting ever again, right? It's more about compromise when you can. So if for example, on your team, you're a leader, that you have an equal mix of introverts and extroverts, and you're designing an offsite, making sure that you have like a optional happy hour, and you really emphasize at the end of the day, this is going to be very casual. If you want to come, great. If you need to go back to your hotel room, take a break, just recharge. That's also totally fine. That's a way of, again, striking that compromise of giving extroverts a place to gather and have fun, but also being mindful that introverts are going to need some time to decompress. The design team sort of did their own version of this. So you can see it's beautifully designed. I love that they put on theirs, I want to be good at. So really understanding what are your teammates working on? What are your reports working on? So you can offer them growth opportunities that will get them excited. And then this is more of a sort of traditional, straightforward one. Conditions I like to work in, things I love, things I struggle with, times, hours. I think, again, if you're working on a global team, really useful just to check in on where are you located? And you can even block off time on your calendar and say, these are my working hours, and that can be really helpful. So just an awareness of cultural differences can go a long way in making sure that you're not sort of creating misunderstandings where there don't need to be any, establishing those communication norms, and then discussing your differences and how you'll navigate those as well. Okay, that's all the content we have. So would love to take questions. And Molly, maybe if you want to pick a question, we can get started on that portion.
Yeah, actually, Liz, this is Liz Pisney. I have some curious